Many people think that a bank is a good place to protect their money, and in a way, for a long time, that is what almost everyone was taught. Work hard, receive your paycheck, pay your bills, and leave what is left saved at the bank. That feels like security. That feels like responsibility. That feels like the right path. But when we look more closely, we realize that money sitting still does not truly grow. In Robert Kiyosaki's view, it may be stored, but it is not working for you. And that is the point that many people take a long time to understand. While money sits in an account, the cost of living keeps rising. The price of food goes up, rent goes up, materials go up, land goes up, properties go up. In other words, the money that seemed safe is quietly losing strength. It still shows the same number on the bank screen, but it no longer buys the same amount of things. That is why Kiyosaki teaches that saving alone is not enough. You need to transform money into assets. When I talk about assets, I am talking about what puts money in your pocket or increases in value over time. And that is precisely where land and real estate begin to enter as important pieces of this conversation. Because unlike money sitting still, a well-chosen piece of land or a property purchased with strategy can grow in value, can generate income, and can protect your wealth against currency devaluation. That is the great mindset shift. Stop thinking only about saving money and start thinking about buying things that can become more valuable over time. Many people spend entire years working only to accumulate paper, while the truly wealthy use that paper to buy real assets. This difference seems small at first, but it changes everything in the long run, because those who only save money spend their lives chasing bills. But those who learn to buy assets begin, little by little, to build a foundation that works for them. And within this logic, land stops being just a piece of ground. It becomes a store of value, a protection, and, in many cases, a gateway to financial freedom. When you begin to calmly observe how wealthy people build and protect their wealth, one thing almost always stands out. At some point in their journey, they pass through the real estate market. This does not happen by chance. Robert Kiyosaki always taught that the rich do not work only for money. They use money to buy assets. And among those assets, real estate appears frequently because it manages to bring together two very important things at the same time: potential for appreciation and the possibility of generating cash flow. That is where many people begin to awaken. Because the middle class most of the time is focused on earning money and paying expenses. The wealthy, on the other hand, think about acquiring what continues to produce value, even after the initial effort ends. They do not look at money merely as something to spend or save. They look at money as a tool of acquisition, a bridge, an instrument that serves to buy assets which then go on to sustain part of their financial life. And the real estate sector appears frequently in this logic because it offers something concrete, something real, something that can be used, rented, developed, improved, and in many cases resold at a higher value. Think about it simply. If a person works 20 or 30 years only to gather money, but never transforms part of that effort into solid assets, they always depend on the next paycheck, the next client, the next opportunity. Now, when that same person starts buying assets, they begin to build a structure. And Kiyosaki talks a lot about this. Financial freedom is not born when you earn a lot in 1 month. It begins when your income from assets starts to cover your expenses. That is the point where the game changes. That is why, when you study families that maintained wealth for generations, you notice that many of them did not rely only on salary, operational businesses, or money in an account. They bought land. They bought real estate. They built wealth on top of assets that stand the test of time, because money can lose value, currencies can weaken, costs can rise, but a real asset, when well chosen, tends to continue having utility and relevance in the economy. And that utility is one of the foundations of lasting wealth. Kiyosaki always tried to show that the secret is not to appear rich, but to possess things that produce wealth. And the real estate market fits exactly into that point. It's not presented as a magic trick, nor as an easy promise. It is seen as one of the pillars of financial freedom because it can help an ordinary person break out of the cycle of working merely to survive and enter the cycle of building wealth that grows, protects, and in many cases pays part of their cost of living. When you understand this, your vision changes. You stop admiring only those who earn well and begin to admire those who build well. Because earning money is important, yes. But building assets is what provides the foundation. It is what creates the base. It is what separates income from wealth. And within Robert Kiyosaki's teachings, that difference is worth gold. Income can come and go, but well-chosen assets can keep working for you for many years. That is why, for so many people who achieved financial freedom, the property was not just a purchase. It was a strategy. It was a long-term decision. It was a way of taking money out of stagnation and putting it in motion within something that has real-world value. And that is exactly where the transition begins, from a survival mindset to a wealth-building mindset. One of the most important ideas Robert Kiyosaki teaches is that wealth is not measured by the money that comes into your hands today, but by your capacity to maintain value and generate income over time. And that is precisely why real estate holds such a strong place within this vision. Because unlike money sitting still, a well-chosen property can fulfill two functions at the same time. It can put money in your pocket and at the same time protect what you built with so much effort. That difference seems simple, but it completely changes the way of thinking. Many people look at a property only as a big purchase, an expensive possession. But within Kiyosaki's logic, the main question is never just, how much does it cost? The right question is, does this put money in my pocket or take money out of my pocket? When a property generates rent, when it can be used as a source of income, when it appreciates over time and still helps protect your wealth, it begins to approach what Kiyosaki calls an asset. And that is where the game starts to change. Think about real life. A person works hard for years, saves money, makes sacrifices, gives up a lot of things. But if they leave all that effort sitting in currency, they become vulnerable. Vulnerable to inflation because everything goes up in price. Vulnerable to currency devaluation because money can lose strength. Vulnerable to a loss of purchasing power because what seemed sufficient a few years ago may no longer be enough today. And this happens silently. It makes no noise. It sends no warning. The person looks at the balance and sees the same number, but in practice that value has already shrunk. Now compare that with the logic of a real estate asset. Imagine a property that today generates monthly income. While many things get more expensive, this asset can keep pace with time. The rent can be adjusted, the area can grow, demand can increase, the asset itself can become more valuable. In other words, instead of watching your wealth be slowly eroded, you come to possess something that can respond to time in a more intelligent way. That is why so many investors see real estate as a kind of patrimonial shield. It is not just a possession. It can be a defense. And here a very strong point from Kiyosaki's teachings comes in. The wealthy try to escape the accumulation of purposeless paper and move toward real assets. They know that money, on its own, is vulnerable. That is why they look for things that have utility, demand, and concrete presence in the economy. A property can serve as housing, commerce, rental, accommodation, storage, business operations. It has a function in the real world, and everything that has a function tends to have value. That is a detail many people ignore while spending their lives only chasing a salary. Another important thing is to understand that wealth is not only what you have, but what you manage to preserve. Because it makes no sense to earn well for a few years and then watch everything lose value through lack of strategy. Real estate enters this conversation precisely as a tool for retaining wealth. It can hold part of the value you built, while money in an account remains more exposed to the erosion of time. And when that property also generates income, it stops being only a protection and becomes a source of cash flow as well, which is one of the most central concepts in Robert Kiyosaki's work. At the core, that is the great mindset shift. Stop looking at money only as something to save and start looking at it as a seed. If you leave the seed sitting still, it remains just a seed. But if you plant it in the right place, it can grow, take root, and bear fruit for a long time. A property within this vision can represent exactly that. Not as a miracle, not as an easy promise, but as a concrete tool to generate income, protect value, and strengthen your financial foundation. That is why those who think long-term begin to understand that the goal is not just to work for money. The goal is to use today's money to buy assets that protect tomorrow. And when a property does that, it stops being just a big purchase and becomes part of a larger strategy. The strategy of building wealth that withstands the test of time. There is a very simple reason why so many intelligent people pay close attention to land. No one can manufacture more soil. That is a detail too powerful to ignore. Robert Kiyosaki always taught that the wealthy look for real assets, things that have utility, scarcity, and demand. And land brings together exactly those elements. You can print more money, you can build more buildings, you can open new businesses, but creating more territory in desirable regions does not happen in the same way. And when something is limited, but the number of people interested in it keeps growing, value tends to gain strength as time passes. Think practically. The population increases, cities expand, new families need housing, new businesses need space, schools need land, hospitals need land, markets, warehouses, parking lots, condominiums, commercial centers, everything needs ground, everything starts with land. Before the beautiful building exists, before the busy shop exists, before the finished house exists, there was a piece of soil waiting to be transformed into something useful. That is why land occupies such a strategic place in wealth building. It is at the foundation of almost everything. And here, a very important lesson comes in that connects well with Kiyosaki's mindset. The wealthy try to position themselves before the crowd fully recognizes the value of an asset. They do not wait for a neighborhood to become too famous and then rush in, paying high prices. They try to understand movements, expansion, growth, and future need. They know that when a region starts attracting infrastructure, commerce, circulation, and housing, that piece of land that once seemed simple can become extremely valuable. What today seems distant, tomorrow may become a point of interest. What today seems empty, tomorrow may be surrounded by development. Many people make the mistake of looking at a piece of land and thinking only about what it is at that exact moment. But those who think like investors try to look at what that land can become. That is the kind of vision that separates consumption from strategy. An ordinary person looks and sees brush, distance, silence, little movement. A trained investor looks and asks, what is coming here? A new road, urban expansion, commerce, universities, condominiums, new companies. Because in the world of assets, value is not only in the present. Many times it is in the future that has not yet arrived, but has already started giving signs. And the more time passes, the stronger this logic becomes, because the need for space does not disappear. On the contrary, as the population grows, competition for good locations tends to increase. And that is one of the reasons why so many fortunes were built on land and real estate, not only because they generate income, but because they are tied to a permanent human need. People will always need to live, Work, move around, study, produce, sell, be attended to, store. And all these activities depend on physical space. In Robert Kiyosaki's view, this connects directly with the idea of possessing assets that have real economic relevance. He always warned that paper and promises can lose strength, but concrete assets tend to have a different presence in the economy. Land carries that weight. It is not just a possession. It can be a strategic position. It can be the foundation of a project, of a future income, of a silent appreciation that happens while many people are still distracted, simply keeping money in the bank. And that is precisely why land tends to be seen as such a powerful asset, because its supply is limited, its utility is broad, and its importance does not depend on passing trends. Time may change technologies, habits, and businesses, but the need for space continues to exist. Those who understand this stop seeing land as a piece of ground and begin to see it as a scarce, valuable resource deeply connected with the building of lasting wealth. There is a phrase that summarizes very well the logic of those who understand the long-term value of land. You do not wait to buy land, you buy land and wait. This idea seems simple, but it carries a very deep vision about wealth building. Robert Kiyosaki always taught that the secret is not to keep chasing money all the time, but to acquire assets that can work in silence while time passes. And land fits exactly into that point. Because in many cases, it does not require daily effort. It does not demand constant attention, and it does not depend on you being there every day for it to continue existing and maintaining its potential value. Think about how many people spend their entire lives trading time for money. They wake up early, work hard, solve problems, face pressure, pay bills, and in the end, find themselves starting all over again the following month. It is exhausting because everything depends on their presence. If they work, they earn. If they stop, the income decreases. Kiyosaki always warned about this cycle because it traps a person in a life where money only comes in when there is constant effort. A well-chosen asset, on the other hand, can follow a different path. It can keep maturing even when you are not looking at it every day. That is precisely where land draws attention. Unlike many businesses that require daily operation, employees, inventory, customer service, marketing, and constant problem solving, a piece of land can cross time in a much quieter way. You do not need to wake up in the middle of the night to manage a vacant lot. You do not need to serve customers every day. You do not need to restock merchandise. And yet, that asset can continue gaining strength, especially if it is in a region with growth potential. This does not mean that analysis, care, and strategy are not required. It simply means that time, in this case, can become a powerful ally. This is one of the most beautiful ideas in Kiyosaki's mindset. Understanding that the wealthy try to build structures that function beyond their own direct effort. They do not want to depend solely on their own energy to grow. They buy assets that can mature, appreciate, and strengthen their wealth as the years pass. And land has that characteristic. Many times, it rewards patience more than it rewards haste. While many people are looking for quick gains, chasing the next new thing and exhausting themselves emotionally, the patient investor understands that certain assets grow stronger precisely because they knew how to wait. Many people miss great opportunities because they want immediate results. They want to buy today and see a transformation tomorrow. They want to plant in the morning and harvest in the afternoon. But solid wealth rarely comes from anxiety. It tends to come from vision, positioning, and time. When you buy land intelligently in an area with potential, you are buying more than a physical space. You are buying possibility. You are buying the right to be there before more people notice the value of that place. And in many cases, the real multiplication comes precisely from the waiting. That is why this phrase carries so much power. You buy and you wait, because it teaches discipline, It teaches long-term vision. It teaches you not to act like someone who just wants fast money, but like someone who is building a foundation. And that foundation matters enormously. Kiyosaki always made clear that financial freedom is not built only from high income, but from assets that grow over time and sustain the future. Land, when well chosen, can do this silently. While you work, while the city grows, while infrastructure advances, while new needs arise, that asset remains there, accumulating potential. In the end, this kind of strategy favors those who understand that wealth is not built only through frantic movement. Sometimes it is built through calm, well-thought-out decisions. Sometimes the greatest success is not in doing more, but in buying right and letting time do part of the work. And that may be one of the most powerful lessons of this stage. There are assets that demand constant effort, and there are assets that reward vision and patience. Land, many times, belongs to that second group. When you understand this, you stop seeing time as an enemy and begin to see it as a partner. And that mindset shift is worth a great deal. Because in the world of wealth building, those who know how to wait with intelligence often go further than those who keep running without direction. When you begin to look at the economy with Robert Kiyosaki's mindset, one thing becomes very clear. Almost everything that moves money in the world touches in some way the real estate market. And understanding this completely changes the way you see wealth building. Because, at its core, we are not just talking about houses or plots of land. We are talking about the physical foundation upon which economic life takes place. It is as if real estate were the stage and all sectors were the actors. The audience may pay attention to the play, the lights, the dialogue, the famous names. But without a stage, nothing happens. Think about a bank. Many people look at a bank and see money, vaults, loans, cards, investments. But the bank needs to exist somewhere. It needs a branch, a building, an office, land, a structure. Now think about a hospital. What would a hospital be without physical space? It needs land, rooms, corridors, an operating theater, parking, a reception, wards, and the same applies to schools, hotels, supermarkets, factories, churches, warehouses, transport companies, commercial centers, media studios, restaurants, clinics, offices, and even public bodies. Everything depends on space. Everything needs a real foundation. Everything needs real estate. That is why, within Kiyosaki's logic, those who own assets tied to the structure of the economy are closer to understanding how the wealthy think. Because the wealthy do not look only at what is being sold. They look at the entire machinery. They try to identify where the value that sustains the functioning of activities lies, and one of the strongest answers to that is precisely real estate. It serves as support for commerce, housing, services, education, health, logistics, politics, and production. In other words, when you understand the weight of the real estate market, you realize it is not sitting in a separate corner of the economy. In fact, it is spread throughout almost everything. This perception is very important because it helps break a limited view that many people carry. Some people think that real estate is only for those who want to buy a home to live in, or for those who are already very wealthy. But Kiyosaki always taught that what is essential is learning to see assets. And an asset can be tied to any constant human need. Well, if every economic activity needs space to exist, then real estate stops being merely a physical good and becomes a central piece in the functioning of the system. It is not just a wall, a roof, or a piece of soil. It is a structure that allows money to circulate. And when you realize this, your mind begins to make new connections. You start to understand why so many fortunes were built on real estate, land, commercial buildings, and property interests. It is not just because real estate appreciates. It is because real estate is connected to the continuous needs of society. As long as there are people living, working, buying, studying, receiving care, traveling, voting, producing and consuming, there will be a need for physical space. And what consistently meets a need tends to have economic strength. Kiyosaki always sought to teach that true wealth is born when you move out of the consumer mindset and into the owner mindset. The consumer pays to use. The owner receives because they possess. That is a quiet but enormous difference. The consumer sees a hotel and thinks about accommodation. The investor sees a hotel and thinks about cash flow, occupancy, location, and demand. The consumer sees a school and thinks about education. The investor understands that someone is being paid for the structure that makes that education possible. The consumer sees a busy shopping center and thinks about movement. The investor sees rent, appreciation, land, and recurring income. That is exactly where this reasoning gains strength. Because when almost every economic activity depends on a space to function, owning real estate or participating in real estate assets means being connected to the heart of many sectors at the same time. You do not depend on just one trend or one passing fashion. You connect with permanent needs of life in society, and that makes the real estate market so relevant within wealth building. At the core, this stage of reasoning reveals a powerful truth. Those who control assets that sustain the economy are in a better position than those who simply consume the services those assets make possible. And this is fully aligned with Robert Kiyosaki's teachings. He always drew attention to the fact that the wealthy buy assets, while most people limit themselves to paying to use what the assets of others provide. When you understand that banks, hospitals, schools, hotels, media companies, transport firms, and even the machinery of government depend on real estate, your vision matures. You stop seeing the real estate sector as something small and begin to see it as a backbone of the economy. And from that point, you also begin to understand why so many financially intelligent people make a point of having part of their wealth supported by real assets. Because in the end, almost everything revolves around space, and those who understand the value of space begin to better understand the value of wealth. Now the idea moves out of the realm of theory and into a practical opportunity that connects very well with Robert Kiyosaki's mindset: land banking. In simple words, this means buying land in regions that still seem cheap, little disputed, and often even ignored by the majority, with the vision that that place may transform greatly in the future. And this kind of reasoning has everything to do with the way Kiyosaki teaches you to think, not rushing to buy when everyone has already recognized the value, but positioning yourself earlier when the asset is still accessible. Many people only become interested in a region once it is already developed, busy, valued, full of commerce, paved, lit, surrounded by beautiful homes and with signs everywhere. The problem is that by the time a place reaches that point, the price has usually already risen. In other words, most of the appreciation went to those who saw it earlier, and that is exactly where land banking draws attention. It is based on the logic of looking at a still, simple area and asking, what could happen here in the coming years? Could this place receive a road? Could it receive power? Could it attract housing? Could it grow with the expansion of the city? Could it become a commercial point of interest? Could it move from silence onto the map of development? This way of thinking separates the ordinary mind from the mind trained to invest very clearly. The ordinary mind looks at the present and says, there is nothing here. The investor's mind looks at the future and asks, what could be born here? And that question is worth a great deal of money. Because in the world of assets, those who learn to see earlier tend to pay less to enter and have more room to grow. It is as if you were arriving before the crowd. And Kiyosaki always insisted on this idea of financial education precisely for that reason. The problem is not a lack of opportunity. Many times it is a lack of vision to recognize the opportunity while it still seems small. The phrase, The village of today can become the city of tomorrow perfectly summarizes this reasoning. Those who look at many developed cities today realize that at some point in the past, they too were overlooked areas, distant, without much attention. There was a time when many people passed through and saw nothing. They saw no future, no expansion, no possibility, but some did. Some understood that urban growth does not happen overnight. It begins slowly, with small signs, a new construction, a road, a development, a university, a company arriving, a neighborhood expanding, a greater flow of people. And when these signs come together, what seemed simple begins to move to another level. Within Kiyosaki's logic, this is very powerful because it shows how the wealthy try to buy value before it becomes obvious. They know that the greatest return usually does not come from entering late. It comes from entering early with intelligence. And land banking offers precisely that, the possibility of acquiring a real asset before the full appreciation takes place. Instead of chasing something already expensive, you try to identify where the next growth may happen. Instead of buying to the applause of the crowd, you buy based on the logic of scarcity, expansion, and time. But there is an important detail, and here, Kiyosaki's philosophy is very relevant. Education comes before investment. Land banking is not about buying any piece of land in any way, driven only by excitement. It is necessary to study documents, location, access, infrastructure, growth trends, legal security, and the future utility of the area. Because Kiyosaki never defended financial blindness, on the contrary, he always taught that a good asset is an understood asset. The intelligent investor does not put money somewhere simply because something is cheap. They put money in because they see future value based on analysis, context, and strategy. And this can be an interesting entry point even for those who do not yet have capital for larger properties. Because many times, land in less explored areas costs less than finished properties in valued regions. This means that an ordinary person with discipline and vision can begin to position themselves more intelligently. Instead of spending years only saving money that loses strength, they can direct part of their capital into a real asset with appreciation potential. And that changes everything because they stop being merely someone who saves and start acting like someone who builds wealth. At the core, land banking is a practical lesson about patience, vision, and positioning. It teaches that wealth does not always come from what shines today. Many times, it comes from the ability to recognize early what tomorrow will draw everyone's attention to, and that is one of Robert Kiyosaki's strongest lessons. The wealthy do not wait for the opportunity to become popular before acting. They study, position themselves, and let time work in their favor. That is how an apparently simple piece of land can become a powerful decision. Because those who only buy what is already finished generally pay a high price for the present, but those who buy with vision can pay a low price for the future. And in wealth building, that difference can change a person's financial destiny. After understanding the value of land and the logic of positioning yourself early, the next turning point is to realize that the real estate market does not offer just one single path. And this is very important within Robert Kiyosaki's vision, because he always taught that wealth does not come from memorizing a ready-made formula, but from learning to see different opportunities within the same logic, buying or controlling assets that can generate income, grow in value, and strengthen your cash flow. This is where many people begin to mature financially, because at first, a person thinks about real estate in a very limited way. They imagine that investing in this sector means only buying a finished home, waiting a few years, and hoping it appreciates. But those who begin to study more deeply realize that the game is much bigger. A property does not need to be seen only as something to buy and leave sitting there. It can be reorganized, improved, repositioned, rented in different ways, shared with partners, and even developed jointly with other people. In other words, the investor stops being just a buyer and becomes a strategist. One of the most interesting paths at this stage is to look at old residential properties with fresh eyes. Many people walk past these properties and see problems. They see worn walls, old paint, poor layout, tired appearance, outdated structure. But those who think like trained investors begin to ask a different question. What could this property become after a thoughtful reorganization? And that question is worth a great deal, because in many cases, the value lies not only in the property as it stands today, but in the potential hidden within it. Robert Kiyosaki always hammered home the idea that the wealthy look for value where the majority sees difficulty. And this shows up strongly in this type of opportunity. An old, poorly presented or poorly utilized property may be undervalued by the market, but with vision, smart renovation and repositioning, it can take on a new life. Sometimes it is not even a matter of a luxury transformation. It can be something simpler, improving the layout of the spaces, refreshing finishes, correcting visible flaws, making the environment more functional, more attractive, and more aligned with what the market is looking for. And when that happens, that asset can come to be worth more, and in many cases, generate better income. It is like finding a tired house and revealing the potential that was hidden there all along. Many people see expense. The investor sees an opportunity to add value, and that difference in vision separates those who merely buy from those who truly know how to build wealth. Because Kiyosaki never spoke only about owning assets. He also taught the importance of improving the asset, making money work harder, increasing returns, and creating stronger cash flow. In this case, reorganizing an old property can be exactly that, a way of transforming a weak asset into a more productive one. Another path that emerges with great force is that of short lets and furnished apartments. Here, the logic becomes even clearer. Owning the asset is not enough. You need to think about how it can generate more. Many people buy a property and immediately think only of traditional rental, which can indeed be a good strategy. But depending on the location, the profile of the public and the demand in the area, a well-furnished apartment prepared for short-term rentals can generate different income, sometimes even more interesting. And this connects deeply with Kiyosaki's mindset, because he always drew attention to cash flow. The central question remains the same. How much can this asset put in your pocket? Think of a region with a flow of professionals, tourists, students, people on business trips, families in transition, patients accompanying medical treatment, or visitors who need practicality. In these cases, a furnished, well-located and functional property can meet a real market need. And when an asset efficiently solves a need, it gains economic strength. The intelligent investor does not look only at the property itself. They look at the problem the property can solve, because that is what generates demand, occupancy, and incoming money. But the most important thing here is to understand the mindset behind all of this. It is not just about having a nice apartment, it is about transforming a space into an income machine. Kiyosaki always insisted that assets should be analyzed by what they produce. So when a furnished property manages to generate recurring returns, serve the market well, and still preserve wealth over time, it begins to fulfill exactly the role an investor wants, protecting capital and generating cash flow. Now, perhaps one of the most intelligent parts of this stage is realizing that you do not have to do everything alone. And that is liberating. Many people stop growing because they think this way. I do not have a piece of land. I do not have a finished property. I do not have enough money to do something big. But Kiyosaki always taught that the world of business and investments is also the world of leverage. And leverage does not only mean using bank money, it can mean using knowledge, relationships, structure, partnerships, and strategic intelligence. That is exactly where joint ventures with landowners or with owners of stalled construction projects come in. This is a tremendously powerful idea. Imagine someone who owns a very good piece of land, but lacks the capital, knowledge, or organization to develop something on it. On the other side, there is a person who perhaps does not have the land, but has vision, experience, a project, a network of contacts, or the ability to organize the operation. Separately, both may remain limited. Together, they can create a much larger asset. That is the investor mindset. Kiyosaki always showed that the wealthy know how to set up operations where each party contributes what they have. One brings the land, another brings the capital, another brings the management, another brings the execution. And in the end, everyone participates in something larger than they could have built alone. This reasoning is very important because it breaks the belief that only those who start out very strong can succeed in the market. In practice, many opportunities arise precisely from the right combination of different resources. The same applies to stalled construction projects. To many people, an unfinished building seems like failure. It seems like a problem. It seems like a risk. And yes, there can be real risks. But the trained investor tries to see whether there is a locked asset there, waiting for someone with vision to reorganize the situation. Perhaps capital is missing, perhaps management is missing, perhaps negotiation is missing, perhaps someone is needed to connect the pieces and turn something stalled into something profitable. And that is a very valuable skill in the world of investing, seeing potential movement where others see only a blockage. Beyond that, there is another very powerful front, especially for those who cannot yet enter larger deals alone. Fractional ownership, collaboration, the union of friends or partners to participate in something that individually would be difficult to reach. This also connects deeply with Robert Kiyosaki because he always showed that financial education includes learning to use intelligent structures and not just depending on your own pocket all the time. Many people think small because they calculate everything on their own. How much do I have? What can I buy on my own? But the investor's mind starts asking differently. Who can I build something with? How can I participate in a larger asset without carrying everything on my shoulders? How can I intelligently share cost, risk, and opportunity? These questions change the game. Because instead of waiting many years to gather the full value alone, the person can find an organized way to enter earlier, together with other people, as long as there is clarity, legal security, alignment, and well-defined rules. Of course, partnerships without criteria can turn into headaches. That is why, within Kiyosaki's logic, a good partnership is not excitement. It is structure. It is a contract. It is a defined role. It is clear responsibility. It is transparent agreement. Because the intelligent investor does not join simply because they like the idea. They join because the operation makes sense. When this is done well, collaboration can open enormous doors. Ordinary people gain access to larger opportunities, learn together, grow together, and participate in assets that they perhaps could never have reached on their own. At the core, all of this conveys a very strong lesson. The real estate market is not only about buying, it is about seeing the old property as an opportunity for appreciation, seeing the furnished apartment as a generator of cash flow, seeing the idle piece of land as a chance for partnership, seeing collaboration as a bridge to larger assets. And that is exactly the mindset Robert Kiyosaki tried to teach for years, moving away from the limited view of a worker who only trades time for money and entering the vision of the investor who organizes resources to build assets. When you understand this, your thinking changes. You stop thinking, I have no way in, and start thinking, what structure allows me to enter? You stop looking only at the price and start looking at the potential. You stop seeing problems in everything and begin to seek hidden value. And that shift is worth a great deal because wealth rarely grows through sheer brute effort. Most of the time it grows with vision, strategy, and the ability to organize opportunities. Finally, there is a lesson that Robert Kiyosaki always tried to make very clear. Those who think like investors are not locked into a single form of asset. They observe the world, identify constant needs, and try to transform those needs into sources of income and wealth protection. And that is precisely where two ideas come in that at first glance may seem very different, but follow the same logic. Using real assets to generate cash flow and building wealth with a long-term vision. The first of these ideas is to look at properties abroad as a form of diversification and income generation in a strong currency. This draws attention because many people spend their entire lives thinking only about the market around them, limited to the neighborhood, the city, or at most their own country. But the investor mindset goes beyond borders. Kiyosaki always taught that money should be positioned intelligently, seeking assets that make sense within a broader scenario. And in some cases, having a property in another country can represent exactly that, a way of accessing a different economy, a stronger currency, and a source of income less dependent on a single local environment. Think carefully about this. If a person receives income only in a weak currency, they are very exposed. If that currency loses value, their effort loses strength along with it. Now imagine having an asset that generates revenue in a more valued currency. That income can carry a different weight. It can offer more protection. It can expand the investor's options. It can even function as an extra layer of security in times of economic instability. Within Kiyosaki's logic, this connects very well with the idea of not depending on just one source, one system, and one type of asset. Furthermore, a property abroad is not seen simply as status or luxury. This is a confusion many people make. The trained investor does not look first at appearance. They look at the return, the function, and the strategy. If that property can generate rental income, if it is in a region with demand, if it has appreciation potential and also offers exposure to a strong currency, then it begins to fulfill a much more interesting role than simply having an asset in another country. It becomes a piece within a more intelligent wealth architecture. And this is very important, because Robert Kiyosaki always insisted on a central distinction. Ordinary people buy things to impress. Investors buy things to produce. That phrase changes everything. A property in another country can be bought out of ego, and then it becomes a burden. But it can also be bought with vision, and then it becomes an asset. The point is never just the object. The point is the financial function of that object in your life. Does it take money out of your pocket, or does it put money in your pocket? Does it represent expense, or does it represent cash flow? Does it protect wealth, or does it only feed vanity? These are the questions that separate an emotional purchase from a strategic decision. Now, the second idea may surprise many people, the niche of cemeteries. And precisely because it seems unusual, it draws so much attention. But when we look beyond the initial strangeness, we realize the logic remains the same. Kiyosaki always taught to observe the permanent needs of society. And few things are as permanent as the needs tied to the cycle of life. The attentive investor understands that there are sectors that almost no one likes to talk about, but which continue to exist, grow, and move money because they serve real demands. In the case of cemeteries, the logic presented is straightforward. The population grows, urban centers become more competitive, space becomes increasingly limited, and the need for areas designated for this purpose does not disappear. In other words, we are once again before an asset tied to land, scarcity, and continuous utility. It may not be a common topic in everyday conversation, but from the cold standpoint of assets, it remains a segment of the real estate market. And that alone deserves attention from those who want to understand how the most strategic investors think. Many people only see value in what is popular, beautiful, or talked about by everyone. But Kiyosaki always showed that wealth can also be built in discreet, overlooked, and unglamorous niches. In fact, sometimes it is precisely those niches that hide good opportunities, because most people do not even pay attention to them. While the crowd always rushes to the same places, the educated investor analyzes where there is a constant need, a limited supply, and the possibility of a return. And when these three factors meet, an interesting field for observation emerges. The most important thing here is not to rush after any unusual opportunity just because it seems curious. The point is to understand the mindset behind all of this. Throughout this entire reflection, the same message keeps growing stronger. Robert Kiyosaki teaches that the path to wealth lies in transforming money into assets, not in simply accumulating idle currency. Real, useful, scarce assets capable of generating income tend to occupy a central place in that construction. Land, real estate, repositioned properties, rentals, partnerships, larger participations, income in strong currencies, and even lesser-known niches can all be part of the same philosophy, as long as they are analyzed with intelligence. At the core, the great change is mental. It is about stopping thinking like someone who only saves money and starting to think like someone who builds wealth. It's about stopping asking only, how much does it cost? And starting to ask, what does this produce? It is about moving out of the logic of endless effort and entering the logic of assets that work with time. And when that switch flips, the person stops seeing money as an end and begins to see it as a tool. Because in the end, true wealth is not having an idle balance. It is possessing assets that protect your future, strengthen your cash flow, and reduce your dependence on trading time for money forever. That is one of the strongest foundations of Robert Kiyosaki's teachings. And the sooner you understand this, the sooner you begin to build a financial life with structure, vision, and freedom. And if this content made sense to you, like this video now and subscribe to the channel to receive the next pieces of content. That way, you will not miss the upcoming reflections on money, assets, and building real wealth.